Christ is risen from the dead, conquering death by death. That's the most wonderful truth in existence, because everything proceeds from that. Any bit of hope, any bit of purpose in life, anything that we as Christ followers hold to, as far as peace and hope and comfort in our lives, it all proceeds from the fact that Jesus Christ came back from the dead. If that didn't happen, then it's all trying to figure things out according to our own best resources, which aren't great. And it's just a lot of wishful thinking. But Jesus Christ came back from the dead, and it's all true. And so life is rich and good and full, no matter what, because of that. So if you are here for the first time at Parkside, welcome. I'm Bart Steever, the guy who has a hard time getting his mic going in the morning and getting his sermon turned around in the right direction. But really glad to have you here with us, and hope that you feel welcomed. That's our intention, and anything you'd like to know about us and what we stand for, or better yet, who we stand for, we're glad to tell you, but we'd really like to make your acquaintance this morning. We're going through a history of Jesus. There were 4 histories of Jesus that were written by men so famous they went by their first names, kind of like LeBron. You know who that is? We know who Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are. They were either direct followers of Jesus or men who knew the direct followers of Jesus. And they've written histories of him. And Mark is the one that was probably written first. And we think that perhaps Mark wrote the recollections of the Apostle Peter. And you'll notice that as we're going through, we're moving back and forth in the book a little bit. And that's because, first of all, we're not sure that Mark wrote in chronological order, that everything was day to day, week to week, exactly as it happened according to a calendar. Some of it could have been stream of consciousness as to what was recalled and what was given to write there. So we're doing the same thing. We're kind of jumping back and forth, moving around as a particular event in Jesus' life lines up really good with something that's going on with us, even this week. So we're looking at chapter 7 in Mark's Gospel, and down in verse 24, it tells us that Jesus left that place. Well, that place that he left was the region of Galilee. The land of Israel at that time was divided into 3 sections. There was Judea in the south, Samaria in the middle, and Galilee in the north. So he was up north in Galilee and left and went to the vicinity of Tyre. Tyre and Sidon were twin cities just across the border from Israel in the country of Lebanon. Early on in the history of Israel, that region had a good relationship with Israel. That region supplied the cypress wood for the building of the original temple. The king of Sidon, King Hiram, really liked King David and sent the lumber along for that project. But by the 6th century BC, things had gone sour between the 2 regions, and they were declared enemies of each other. And so Jesus went to Tyre. Now, there were some people in the region of Tyre and Sidon. At the time of Jesus, these were very wealthy port cities on the Mediterranean Sea of the Roman Empire, mostly Gentile people. But they had heard enough about Jesus that they made their way down into Israel to connect with him, to be blessed by him, and some of them be healed by him. Well, now Jesus goes into their region, goes north of Israel, and on this particular day, he wasn't looking to make connections with people. He was looking for some downtime. He was looking for some seclusion. He entered a house, and he didn't want anyone to know it. But he couldn't keep his presence secret. He was way too famous for that. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell down at his feet. And the woman was a Greek. She was a Gentile, a non-Jew, which most of the people in that region were. She was born in Syrian Phoenicia. That's what they called this region. And she begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. And he responds to her in a way that just has left us scratching our heads for a long time as to why he would say this. He says, first, let the children eat all they want, for it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." Are you kidding me? He just called this woman and her daughter a dog. Now, how? How do you take this and twist this in some kind of a positive direction as to how Jesus was treating this woman? He wasn't talking about cute little Yorkshire Terriers. In his culture in that time, there weren't many people that kept dogs as pets in their houses. No, dogs were mongrels. They were wild, nasty scavengers in the streets. And that is the comparison that Jewish people in that day and time made of Gentile people. They said, yes, that's what Gentiles are. Gentiles are as low or lower than dogs. And so Jesus goes there. He uses that in reference to her. It just sounds so mean. So how did she respond? How did she come back to him? "Lord," she replied, "even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Even the dogs get something." Which is a good reminder to me. We don't own a dog anymore, but a reminder of how useful a dog can be. Especially if you have little kids at dinner time around the table. They're like Swiffer wet jets just going on around under the table. And especially if you want to clean up a toddler really fast, just the family dog, turn them loose and gets that taken care of in a jiffy. So she says, yeah, even dogs get crumbs. So she doesn't get defensive. She doesn't seem offended. She goes with what he says. She goes with the dog comparison and says, even dogs get some crumbs. Very humble and very clever, really very witty in what she says. And so he told her, he said, for such a reply, you may go, and the demon has left your daughter. And she went home, and she found her child lying on the bed, and the demon was gone. This reply prompted Jesus to extend his mercy to her. But you still scratch your head and go, but did he have to say that to her? What was that about? Jesus is in the habit of doing and saying things that can leave you scratching your head. Here he calls a woman a dog and seemingly, right at first, wasn't going to help her. So did he really mean what he said? What do we make of this? Well, first of all, I love that things like this are recorded in the way that they are recorded. Nobody edits it. Nobody puts a nice spin on it or alters it a little bit to make it more palatable. Nah, that's what he said. That's the very earthy, real, historical Jesus right there. Not the movie character Jesus that you see who's always all cleaned up, moving from scene to scene. Everything that he says is gentleness, sweetness, and light. No, that's not Jesus. He's real. He's the Messiah. He is the Son of God. Yes, God in flesh. He is that. But he's also a man. Every bit of a man. He's a Jewish man. And he doesn't apologize for being any of those things. That's who he is. And we've got to get over thinking that Jesus has to function in the way that we think a person should function today, someone who speaks for God, or someone who speaks at all in a public way. We're very polite. We're very, very sensitive to things that are said. Easily and quickly wounded when somebody crosses some kind of a line of what we think is inappropriate. And Jesus, he didn't have those lines. It isn't so much that he lived in a culture that was different than ours. He's very much like us in his humanity, but he's very, very different from us. And Jesus is a straight talker. He is a straight talker. So if you expect him to function according to a politically correct criteria as to what and should not be said to someone about the truth of God, you're going to have to get over that, because that isn't how Jesus functions. He says some hard things like this that we don't understand. He says some things that we do understand, and we just don't like it. It makes us uncomfortable because it's hard truth. And I'll warn you, July the 7th, it's coming. We're going to get into a couple of those things that Jesus says, and we might go, this is uncomfortable. I don't want to hear this. We're going to let Jesus say what he has to say to us because it's truth that we need to hear in his honesty of what the truth is. Well, what was there about this Gentile woman who had become a traditional enemy of the Jews? What was it that prompted him to call her a dog? Was there something he saw in her, some kind of a harshness or hard edge that he needed to knock off before he could respond to her in a better way? Well, if you look at any kind of a study that gets into what was Jesus thinking here, you'll see a lot of possibilities. I'm going to tell you what I think. And I know this is very presumptuous for me to read the mind of God and to reveal that to you. But he had to be thinking something when he said it. And here it is. You know, we can't seize on one statement that Jesus makes in order to define him and say, this is absolutely what he thought about this issue or this person. You can't do that. You have to take him in totality. You have to take him in context. You know, one time Jesus said when someone was taking issue that a lot of money had been spent in an act of worship toward him. A lady had given him a very expensive amount of ointment, poured it on him actually. And they said, oh, this could have been sold and given to the poor. And Jesus said, well, the poor you have with you always, but she's offering an act of worship that is wonderful, so leave her alone. And we think, well, that seemed cold. That seemed hard, harsh toward the poor. Didn't Jesus care about the poor? Well, of course he did. He was poor. Jesus was poverty-stricken, and he was always reaching out to the poor and commanding his followers and commanding us to have a heart of compassion for the poor and to do something about that. Yes, he cared about the poor. You can't take that as the defining statement of how Jesus regarded the poor. Well, was it because she was a Gentile person and he, being a Jew, was keeping his distance? Over and over again in his ministry, Jesus was reaching out to Gentiles, touching them, blessing them, using them as heroes in the parables and stories that he would tell. I mean, he told us, he said, as we continue his mission and his work here on earth after he's left, he said, you're supposed to go to the whole world, cross all of those ethnic and racial lines, go to the whole world. Not just the Jewish people. So no, that wasn't it either. So what was it? Why did he say such a thing? What was this interaction all about? I think he was toying with her. Saw the level of faith in her and her persistence in continuing with him. He knew what she would say. And there were a lot of people standing around, I'm sure, observing, okay, what's going to happen next in this relationship with this woman? And Jesus wanted them to see and to hear what was going to happen. And so he was drawing her out, he was pulling her out. I think with a wink and a nod, a wink and a nod, he said to this woman, you and I both know that I, a Jew, should not be interacting with you, a Gentile. We regard you as dogs, and you know that. Why do you think I should help you? Wink, wink. That's what I think he's doing. Playing the line out. Saw something that he wanted everybody else to see in this woman's life. And so she comes back to him with this statement of complete humility, but also insight. And when she came back with that answer, I wonder if Jesus laughed in delight at what she said. It doesn't say this, but he could have said, well played, madam. Well played. What a great comeback to what I just said. He didn't do that very often with people, but there were times when people said things to him that really pleased him. There was a Jewish leader, a religious leader who came to him one time and said, what's the most important commandment that a person could ever follow? And Jesus said, love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And the leader said back to Jesus, you've spoken correctly, Rabbi. All of that command that you just stated, that sums up all the law and the prophets. And Jesus said, that's a great comeback. That's a great answer. You're not far from the kingdom. It isn't often that Jesus said something like that to someone. I think that's what he's saying to this woman. I think we're seeing the playful and skillful interchange between two very clever and witty people. And Jesus was delighted. So first of all, she taught a lesson in the abundance and the overflow of God's grace. Even though, as Jesus said, yes, the opportunities in the kingdom of God, in a relationship with God, did come to the Jewish people first. They were given the opportunity to embrace their Messiah before anybody else did. But beyond that, the overflow of God's grace is capable of blessing the entire world, of every people in every nation. And Jesus gave physical pictures of that throughout his ministry when he fed 5,000 people at one time. What an act of mercy and generosity and grace. That's how God is. He's always so over-generous with things. And what was left over? 12 baskets of leftovers. Doggy bags he could send home with people. He fed 4,000 people. You'll read this later on after this account. 4,000 people, 7 big baskets left over. And that's how it always is with the grace of God. Jesus said, you give, and God gives back in a way that you can't contain it. He will shower blessings on you from heaven that will be pressed down, shaken together, spilling over, more than enough for everybody. That's what this woman recognized. She was saying, I'm not asking for a seat at the table. Could I even have some of the spillage, the excess? And that would be enough for me. I know it would be enough for me. God's grace is that good. Yeah, there's more grace in God than there is sin in people. More grace in God than there are sins in all the lives of the people of the world. It's so overwhelming. Such a flood. So powerful in whatever quantity that it comes. And if we Gentiles, most of us are Gentiles here this morning. We may have some people from a Jewish heritage, and welcome. Glad you're here if you are. Most of us are Gentiles. And if all we have received as our crumbs from Jesus, it's been more than enough. It's been more than enough for me. It's been so very sufficient, is very sufficient in my life to where I feel overwhelmed. But it's lots more than crumbs. It's the fullness of the grace of Jesus that he extends. The other thing that we see happening here is a fulfillment of Jesus' work here on earth, what he came to accomplish. Because here he is standing as a representative of one group of people, interacting with a woman from another group of people who basically hate each other. They cannot get along. He was probably surrounded by a lot of Gentile people in this gathering who are wondering, okay, he just called her a dog. Now what happens? But then as they saw the interplay between them and then saw how he reached out to her and accepted her and affirmed her, applauded her faith with a healing, the lesson they learned that day was, what do you know? It's a new day. This rabbi, this Messiah man, this Son of God, whatever he is bringing in a new day of relationships between us and our traditional enemies. Look at the line he just crossed. And that's why Jesus came. And what was going on in that culture in that day? Of people suspicious of each other, calling each other bad names, drawing up lines of division. Still going on today, isn't it? As much as we're trying to blur those lines and bring people back together, it seems like the harder we try, the worse it gets. It seems. People are gathering behind battle lines, keeping their distance, willing to fight it out if they have to preserve their side of the wall. And as Christ came, he came to get rid of those walls and those barriers. First of all, he came to break down the wall that stands between us and our God, because he is God. He's the only one that could do it. That division, which is marked by sin, he broke it down so that we could be brought back into a relationship with God, so that we in turn could bring each other back into relationship with each other. And we are called, as followers of Jesus, we are called to be his agents, to jump over those walls, to break down those walls between people, and bring humanity back together in relationship with God, and so that we can find ourselves in harmony with each other that is so elusive these days, So hard to come by. And we are, the song that we sang here this morning, it said that the church, we are the church, and the church is people. The church the people who follow Jesus. We are the hope of the world. We're the ones that Jesus has mandated as his peacemaking agents here on earth. That's what he said. Blessed are the peacemakers, you and I, for we shall be called sons and daughters of God, because we're the ones who unite people with God. And so he calls us to start chipping away in every way that we can, chipping away at those walls, those barriers that stand between us, and extending hands of friendship and an embracing of people who otherwise we would keep our distance from. So what's the reality of this? What's this look like? Well, there's lots of ways that we deal with this in our personal lives. And I say this often, but I don't want to assume anything about you. So if the illustrations I'm using are not true of you, then don't take offense. I'm not talking about you, but these are some of the things that I deal with in my life, and maybe they're true of you. Who are our traditional enemies today? You look around and you see people. I saw a family in Target yesterday as I was waiting to check out, and the lady had on a hijab, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, the Muslim head covering. It was a Muslim family. How do we understand, as Christian people, how do we understand Muslim people? It can be tempting to think of them as, that's the enemy. These are people who have declared us to be their enemy. And therefore, it's hard not to think of them as me being their, yes, fulfilling that. If I'm their enemy, then they're my enemy. And Jesus says, no, that line has got to be crossed. And we've got to understand that, first of all, the stereotypes that we make of Muslim people are so often inaccurate. Yes, there is that ugly element among people that is there among all people. I don't care what group of people you pick out, it's there. But so many Muslim people are really looking for some acceptance, some inclusion. They feel very isolated in a country where they are a tiny minority, and they move through their day in isolation with people looking at them with eyes of suspicion, people who are not a part of their community. And they would love for someone to extend a hand of friendship, whether they come to accept the truth of Christ or not. I wonder if they ask the question, among these people who follow Isa, that's the Muslim name for Jesus, among the followers of Isa, I wonder if there are even crumbs of grace that might be extended to people like us, to where we could even have just friendship and acceptance and some way out of the isolation and the animosity that we deal with every day. Are there Christians who would cross the line to be our friends? Sometimes the struggle we face is that there's that religious one, but often that is tied up too in race, in ethnicity. There's a lot of that tension in our culture today. And we see somebody of a different skin tone, lighter than us, darker than us. And there may be ways that we stereotype that or we make assumptions about that. Immediately, this person would not like me because of our differences. And I'm not so sure I like them because of whatever reason we might give for that. And so we're very content to stay behind our lines and leave that wall in place. And somebody has got to cross that in the only way that's going to work, or we're going to destroy ourselves if we don't figure that out. And the only way that wall is brought down is through Christ, is through Christian people being the agents as peacemakers in this world to say, I'll be the first. I'll be the first to cross the line. And I won't just meet somebody halfway. I'll go all the way. I'll go as far as I have to go to make it happen, to establish a relationship. And we have to be so aware, and we've said this before, and again, I'm not assuming a bad thing about us as the people of Parkside, okay? Because I think we're a good people and an accepting people. But we have to be so sensitive that when somebody comes in who, I mean, let's face it, we're predominantly a very white congregation. We have some minorities with us, but not very many. When somebody comes in, we need to be so aware of that. Our radar needs to go off and say, make this person feel welcome here. Go out of your way to do that, because they could be asking the question, is there even a crumb of grace, even a crumb available to somebody who's feeling very awkward and very out of place right now? I need somebody to come alongside me and say, glad you're here. We want you to be a part of us. Somebody's got to do it, and we're the ones. And not just for somebody that walks into an assembly on a Sunday morning, but day after day at work, at school, in the neighborhood, wherever it is. We're the people that do that. We're the hope that things can be different. Okay, here's a big one. I'm going to go where angels fear to tread, but I'm going to go there anyway. This is LGBTQ Pride Month in the United States, and it's being celebrated in a big way here in our city. There was a Pride event at Sawyer Point yesterday downtown. There's a rainbow flag flying over City Hall this week. And within that community and within people who are sympathetic to that perspective or that community, there is an expected response from Christians, a response of anger and immediate condemnation. Or on the other hand, there can be another swing of the pendulum to a complete compromise by followers of Christ who say, it really doesn't make any difference anymore. Somewhere between that is where we need to fall. To be true to Christ and be truly compassionate to people and to help them find what we have found. Showing up at some kind of an event, Christians showing up at an event with angry signs and shaking of fists, or unloading in diatribes on social media, fulfills every negative expectation that people have of us as followers of Jesus. Yeah, so full of truth, so full of themselves. But where's the grace? Where's the grace? Where's the hope for something different? And there are people who are not in a total buy-in. They're struggling, they're wondering. They want to know what the truth is. There are people within our fellowship here at Parkside who struggle with these issues, who wonder about these issues, and they're not about to say anything to anybody because they don't know what the reaction is going to be. Can I trust people who are followers of Jesus to give me even a crumb of grace, to help me explore the truth of Christ, and to admit that they need His grace every bit as much as everybody does? Can that be found here among us? And I want to say, yes, it can be. And maybe that hasn't always happened. And if it hasn't, I'm sorry, but it needs to happen and should and will. We need to, Jesus, when Jesus got angry, what did Jesus get angry at? The days He got really ticked off. What lit Him up? It wasn't sinful people. It was people who were so full of themselves that they couldn't recognize their need for grace and forgiveness in their lives. They wouldn't admit that they were sinners. And in turn, they refused to extend the truth and the love and the grace of God to other people. And Jesus was livid with people like that. But whenever He came into contact with a woman like this one, this Syrophoenician lady, or any sinful person who was willing to admit, God, I need help, have mercy, I need help, so gentle, so kind, so full of grace. Yes, in combination with the truth. And that is the balance we've got to strike as the followers of Jesus here at Parkside. So many of the things that we divide over today are the things that we find our identity in are temporary. We say, I am this because of my gender. I am this because of my political stance. I am this because of my race. I am this because of my sexual preference. I am this because of this. On and on it goes. None of those things extend to eternity. None of them. And God says, none of these are the places where you find your identity as a person. Our identity is in Christ as a son or a daughter of Christ. And that's where it begins and where it ends. And that's where it extends into eternity, where our identity is that we finally and fully carry the image of God in its completeness and in its perfection. All of these other things are going to pass away. I'm not saying they are of no consequence. These are things we have to wrestle with We have to work through and have to overcome, but they don't extend into eternity, and they are not our identity. We need to help people find what their true identity is. It's said so well, as Paul wrote about the ministry of Jesus when he came. He said, he himself is our peace, Jesus Christ, who has made the two groups into one. And here he's talking about Jews and Gentiles. You know, when we say that, I've never figured out how Christian people can have any kind of a bias or prejudice against Jewish people when our Lord and Savior was Jewish. I've never figured that one out. But anyway, who has made the two groups into one? And he came to destroy the barrier between Jew and Gentile, the dividing wall of hostility. By setting aside in his flesh the law with its commands and regulations, his purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, out of the diversity, out of the multiple cultures of the world, to make one humanity, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. He came and preached peace to you who were far away and peace to those who were near. For through him we all have access to the Father by one Spirit. That's where we find harmony, unity, peace, even here on earth. By embracing the peace of Christ that only he can give, and teaching us to love and to live and to treat each other differently.